The Road. Chapter 16 of T.E. Lawrence's The Mint. The extravagance in which my surplus emotion expressed itself lay on the road. So long as roads were tarred, blue and straight, not hedged and empty and dry, so long I was rich. Nightly I'd run up from the hangar upon the last stroke of work, spurring my tired feet to be nimble. The very movement refreshed them after the day-long restraint of service. In 5 minutes my bed would be down, ready for the night. In 4 more I was in my breeches and puttees, pulling on my gauntlets as I walked over to my bike, which lived in a garage hut opposite. Its tyres never wanted air, its engines had a habit of starting at second kick, a good habit, for only by frantic plunges upon the starting pedal could my puny weight force the engine over the 7 atmospheres of its compression. Boanerges' first glad roar at being alive again jarred the huts of Cadet College into life. There goes a noisy bugger, someone would say enviously in every flight. It is part of an airman's profession to be knowing with engines, and a thoroughbred engine is our undying satisfaction. The camp wore the virtue of my Brough like a flower in its cap. Tonight, Tug and Dusty came to the step of our hut to see me off. Running down to the smoke, perhaps, jeered Dusty, hitting at my regular game of London and back for tea on fine Wednesday afternoons. Brough is a top gear machine, as sweet in that as most single cylinders in middle. I chugged lordily past the guard room and through the speed limit at no more than 16. Round the bend, past the farm, and the way straightens. Now for it. The engine's final development is 52 horsepower, a miracle that all this docile strength waits behind one tiny lever for the pleasure of my hand. Another bend, and I have the honour of one of England's straightest and fastest roads. The burble of my exhaust unwound like a long cord behind me. Soon my speed snapped it, and I heard only the cry of the wind, which my battering head split and fended aside. The cry rose with my speed to a shriek, while the air's coolness streamed like 2 jets of iced water into my dissolving eyes. I screwed them to slits and focused my sight 200 yards ahead of me on the empty mosaic of the tar's gravelled undulations. Like arrows, the tiny flies pricked my cheeks, and sometimes a heavier body, some housefly or beetle, would crash into face or lips like a spent bullet. A glance at the speedometer, 78. Boanerges is warming up. I pull the throttle right open on the top of the slope, and we swoop, flying across the dip and up down the switchback beyond. The weighty machine launching itself like a projectile with a whir of wheels into the air at the takeoff of each rise, to land lurchingly with such a snatch of the driving chain as jerks my spine like a rictus. Once we so fled across the evening light with the yellow sun on my left, when a huge shadow roared just overhead. A Bristol fighter from Whitewash Villas, our neighbour aerodrome, was banking sharply round. I checked speed an instant to wave, and the slipstream of my impetus snapped my arm and elbow astern like a raised flail. The pilot pointed down the road towards Lincoln. I sat hard in the saddle, folded back my ears, and went away after him Like a dog after a hare, quickly we drew abreast, as the impulse of his dive to my level exhausted itself. The next mile of road was rough. I braced my feet into the rests, thrust with my arms and clenched with my knees on the tank, till its rubber grips goggled under my thighs. Over the first pothole Boanerges screamed in surprise, its mudguard bottoming with a yelp upon the tyre. Through the plunges of the next 10 seconds I clung on, wedging my gloved hand in throttle lever so that no bump should close it and spoil our speed. Then the bicycle wrenched sideways into 3 long ruts. It swayed dizzily, wagging its tail for 30 awful yards. Out came the clutch. The engine raced freely. Brough checked and straightened his head with a shake, as a Brough should. The bad ground was past, and on the new road our flight became bird-like. My head was blown out with air so that my ears had failed, and we seemed to whirl soundlessly between sun-gilt stubble fields. I dared on a rise to slow imperceptibly and glance sideways into the sky. There the Biff was, 200 yards and more back. Play with the fellow? Why not? I slowed to 90, singled with my hand for him to overtake, slowed 10 more, sat up. Over he rattled, his passenger, a helmeted and goggled grin, hung out of the cockpit, and to pass me the up your RAF Randy greeting. They were hoping I was a flash in the pan, giving them best. Open went my throttle again. Brough crept level, 50 feet below, held them, sailed ahead into the clean and lonely country. An approaching car pulled nearly into its ditch at the sight of our race. The Biff was zooming along the trees and telegraph poles, with my scurrying spot only 80 yards ahead. I gained steadily, was perhaps 5 miles an hour faster. Down went my left hand to give the engine 2 extra dollops of oil for fear that something was running hot, but an overhead Jap, super tuned like this one, would carry on to the moon and back unfaltering. We drew near the settlement. A long mile before the first houses I closed down and coasted to the crossroads by the hospital. Biff caught up, banked, climbed and turned for home, waving to me as long as he was in sight. 14 miles from camp, we are here, and 15 minutes since I left Tug and Dusty at the hut door. I let in the clutch again, and easing Boanerges down the hill, along the tram lines, through the dirty streets and uphill to the aloof cathedral, where it stood in frigid perfection above the cowering close. No message of mercy in Lincoln. Our God is a jealous God, and man's very best offering will fail, disdainfully short of worthiness, in the sight of Saint Hugh and his angels. Remigius, earthy old Remigius, looks with more charity on me and Boanerges. I stabled the steel magnificence of strength and speed at his west door and went in to find the organist practicing something slow and rhythmical, like a multiplication table, in notes on the organ. The fretted, unsatisfying and unsatisfied lacework of choir screen and spandrels drank in the main sound. Its surplus spilled thoughtfully into my ears. By then my belly had forgotten its lunch. My eyes smarted and steamed. Out again to sluice my head under the White Hart's yard pump. A cup of real chocolate and a muffin at the tea shop, and Brough and I took the Newark Road for the last hour of daylight. He ambles at 45, and when roaring his utmost surpasses the 100. A skittish motorbike with a touch of blood in it is better than all the riding animals on earth, because of its logical extension of our facilities, and the hint, the provocation to excess conferred by its honeyed untiring smoothness. Because Brough loves me, he gives me 5 more miles of speed than the stranger would get from him. At Nottingham I added sausages from my wholesaler to the bacon which I'd bought at Lincoln. Bacon so nicely sliced that each rasher meant a penny. The solid pannier bags behind the saddle took all this, and at my next stop a farm took also a felt hammocked box of 15 eggs. Home by Sleaford, our squalid purse-proud local village. Its butcher had 6 penn'orth of dripping ready for me. For months I have been making my evening round and marketing twice a week, riding 100 miles for the joy of it and picking up the best food, cheapest over half the countryside.